Good time just to generate that community feeling, however you can do that. And of course, some of you know there are people in the building on Sunday morning, so those of you who live nearby, you're welcome to come by. Today, Eric came in to open up and get the big screen, so I'm in the office at Common Ground. And for those who'd like to do the chant we've been doing, I posted again in the chat the 4 quarters chant or suffusion with the divine abidings. So let's do that to begin our morning together. Receiving the sound of the bell as best you can hear it. Now let us make the 4 boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading 1 quarter, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, likewise the 2nd, likewise the 3rd, likewise the 4th, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1 quarter, with a mind imbued with compassion, likewise the 2nd, likewise the 3rd, likewise the 4th, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1 quarter, with a mind imbued with gladness, likewise the 2nd, likewise the 3rd, likewise the 4th, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. I will abide, pervading 1 quarter, with a mind imbued with equanimity, likewise the 2nd, likewise the 3rd, likewise the 4th, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Listen to the body and allow things to settle, both the body and the mind. And call on any confidence here that the sense of belonging, I belong in this life, I belong in this moment. In a way, we sense that we have rights to be present, to relax, to open, and to fearlessly feel what we're feeling now. Not to no longer have to pretend that the conditions, the experience is different than it is. We just are willing to align with reality. The reality of the body sitting, the reality of sensation, the reality of the mood or the quality of the heart and mind now. And we're just exploring, is it safe to soften? Is it safe to open and feel what's here to feel? Is it safe to simply let everything move? And notice how the experience of the body, sensations in the body, it's really a river, a moving river of sensations, subtle and gross, pleasant, unpleasant. Of course, initially the experience of the body, the experience of sensation may feel static, frozen, hard. But as we relax and as we bring more interest, we see that every aspect of the body, seeing, hearing, smelling and tasting, and the experience of sensation, every aspect is alive with change. It's in motion. Allowing the body to be, allowing it to move and be the way it is. We're learning. It's not easy, but we're learning to be exposed to the river of experience, beginning with the body. And even in those moments, in those places where there seems to be some resistance, some holding, we can experience that holding also as part of the river of experience. This is being known here and now, being felt here and now. And the same goes for the conceiving, thinking, emoting mind and heart. It's also a river of experience, all this mental activity. It also has permission to be the way it is. It's expressing its natural lawfulness, our thoughts, our feelings, emotions, imaginings, Just like the sensations and the sounds and the sights express the nature of this aspect, sense experience. So we're learning to give permission to this activity of the mind and this activity of the body. It really can't be other than the way it is right now. It really doesn't make sense to be in denial or to resist. It really feels right to learn how to open and allow. And in the beginning, a lot of this is just exploring and valuing relaxation, energetically, viscerally softening, this willingness to be both open and sensitive at the same time, undefended and sensitive at the same time. And wisdom has this very particular task, which is to recognize that this experience is being known, being felt, here and now. So wisdom simplifies each moment. The truth of each moment is simply this experience is being known, being felt. And even when there's a lot of doubt or confusion, wisdom can still understand that this doubt or this confusion, this reaction is being known. It feels like this. It's just the next thing being known. And in a very deep sense, this is our refuge. We're learning that this wise, present moment awareness is a real profound refuge for the heart. A place we can keep coming back to, or a perspective that the heart can keep coming back to. This is being known. This is being felt. It's like this now. Keeps moving, keeps changing. Now the next moment is being known and felt. In a deep way, we're aligning with the reality of our life. Using present moment awareness to let our life move through us. No need for friction or resistance. So let's continue in silence now. And now for these last several minutes, see if you can attune to the pleasure of seclusion, the sense that the only responsibility the heart has is to be aware. We'll be aware of many impulses, but to learn to rest, to trust the awareness, the knowing, it's like this. This impulse is being known. This calm or peacefulness is being known. And to feel like we have the permission to allow everything to become really simple. Just being in the knowing. And let that be enough. And what is the experience when we're sitting and there's no presumption that something doesn't belong or that this is not how it's supposed to be, but instead just being in the knowing, this is being known. Might it be okay that it feels like this is like this right now? No need for judgment or defensiveness. Allowing everything to be, to move. Can this be okay, that it's like this? So take a moment, stretch out whatever you need to do. A big welcome to everyone, and a particularly big welcome to anybody who's here for the first time. If we were at Common Ground in the old days when we met in person, there would be somebody greeting and a chance to make some connections. So it's not really the same on Zoom. But it's really okay for folks who are relatively new to just put that in the chat. Hey, I'm new. Here's my name. Here's where I'm from. And for the old-timers to say hi and to welcome them. Just like some of the old-timers put their names in and where they're from. Yeah, and that's just one way to keep building community during these COVID times. And as we've been saying, Shelley Graff and I have been saying, we're not going to abandon the Zoom community. So we're hoping, like we've started, to do more hybrid programs, especially once we don't need to be wearing masks in the building. And but right now, this Sunday morning program will continue to be usually here in the office. I'll be on retreat myself for the next 3 weeks. So Shelley Graff will be teaching Sunday morning. And then in December, I'll be teaching out at IMS, Insight Meditation Society, at the Forest Refuge, the place for long-term practitioners. I'll be teaching there in December. But I plan to be teaching on Sunday morning, just not in my office. I'll be teaching from IMS. So I'll be back in December. And some of you might know we've been in the middle of a residential retreat this weekend that Shelley and I are teaching. Shelley is out at Common Ground's retreat property near Prairie Farm, Wisconsin, which we're just starting to operate after a long renovation. And then we have a couple dozen people online doing the retreat as well, and I'll join them right after this program in the morning. And one of the things we've been reflecting on during our residential retreat is, why is there such a big deal about retreating? Even, our daily 30-minute, 45-minute, hour-long sit, that's a kind of retreating that we do every day. And then, depending on our interest and our schedule and responsibilities, we might be able to go on a retreat a couple times a year. It might be a day-long retreat. It might be a 3-month retreat. Some people at Common Ground have been on more than one 3-month retreats. People like myself and Shelley and other long-time practitioners, if we added up all of the intensive retreat practice we've done in our adult years, it would be more than a few years. I think I'm close to 3 years of my adult life I've been on retreat, in silence, doing sitting meditation, walking meditation, things like that. Now, I'm not saying that's everyone's cup of tea, but what I'd like to do today is just reflect on this this value of retreating. In Buddhism, early Buddhism in particular, we call that seclusion. And it can feel appropriately like, I don't know if we should be suspicious, but it's definitely okay to wonder, what is all this about seclusion and retreating? Because we know firsthand that running away from our problems, we have some unresolved things in our lives, and running away from it, not addressing it, that clearly is not a helpful thing to do. But one of the first things we discover when you're sitting, maybe even when you sat earlier this morning together, when we sit and we clear the mind, settle the body, what do we notice? We notice our life. So retreating isn't some kind of escape. It's not like we're going to a spa and we've got delightful entertainments and beautiful massages and wonderful drinks to drink and, tropical breezes and I mean, there are retreat centers in nice places for sure, but that's not what it's about. It's not an entertainment, and it's not an escape. If retreat, if seclusion is going to be useful, we're secluding ourselves from the busyness, from our duties and responsibilities, so that we can actually meet our life as it is, with a little bit more integrity and a lot more sensitivity. So it's not an escape. And hopefully, especially over time, there are moments of seclusion that are quite healing, deeper states of calm and tranquility, more profound stillness and peacefulness, and then more clarity and sensitivity to what's unfinished in the heart and mind and body. Profound doubts. And we learn to be with the whole spectrum of beautiful, wholesome inner states of calm and peace, and tormented states, states of great doubt. We discover a wisdom and a kindness or a love that isn't shook, isn't disturbed by whatever can arise. I don't know about you, but I'm really interested in that. This is a well-known quote from the Buddha. You shouldn't chase after the past or place expectations on the future. What is past is left behind. The future is as yet unreached. Whatever quality is present, you clearly see right there, not taken in, unshaken. That's how you develop the heart, ardently doing what should be done today. For who knows, tomorrow, death, there's no bargaining with mortality. Whoever lives thus ardently, relentlessly, both day and night, has truly had an auspicious day. So says the peaceful sage. I love that. It's just that beautiful coming together of intimacy and non-grasping, non-attachment. And that's a nice way, if you are sharing with a friend what's all this stuff you're doing with Buddhist awareness practice, mindfulness practice, you can say something. It's nice to be able to, just in a simple way articulate why we're doing the practice, whether you want to call that an aspiration or goal. We need some sense of why we're doing this practice, because it's not easy. I'm sure a lot of you have discovered that. So to be able to aspire to be with the conditions of my life, not having to, demand that my life, the moment, be different than it is, but to really be able to receive the conditions, to be intimate, to be relaxed and open, and free of that conflict or that struggle with the conditions. Doesn't mean we always like the way it is, but we are okay when there are some moments that are unpleasant, just like we can be okay when there are some moments that are really pleasant. And isn't it interesting, that we've had a mind our whole life, a heart, a mind, this sensitivity, this capacity for knowing, right? Clearly it's the most relevant thing about being a human being. And even though we might have really taken care of our car, and some of you really take care of your computers and your, whatever you're into, your clothes, your kitchen gadgets, your home, your garden, your children, right? But how much attention, how much care, how much sensitivity, devotion have we brought to the mind, to the heart? And that's sort of interesting. I mean, it's understandable because whatever the mind is, it's subtle. I mean, relative to taking care of our cell phone, the mind is sort of subtle. But that doesn't give us rights not to be interested and not to take care of it. We have the capacity to get to know the heart and mind and to really learn how to take care of it. And I like this simple way that Gil Fronsdal maps out how to take care of the mind. And this is, just really central to the way the Buddha talks about taking care of our heart and mind. Gil mentioned in an article that we want to learn how to know the mind. Yeah, just like keep the mind in mind. I know that sounds weird. I'll talk about that in a moment. We want to learn how to train the mind. You can't really train or shape the mind until we really know it. And then we want to liberate or free the mind. And these are clearly overlapping endeavors: to know, to shape or train the mind, and to free the mind, to liberate the mind. But this whole value of retreating and sitting every day, it really speaks to wanting to take care of the mind and heart. And, every night before we fall asleep, when we're lying in bed or getting ready for bed, it's really like, as we assess that day, it's really appropriate for us to ask, did I remember to take care of the mind today? How did I take care of the mind today? Or did I neglect it? Well, can I take care of the mind now? How might I do that? Who knows about how to take care of the mind that I could learn from? I mean, a lot of taking care of the mind, as we find out in our practice, is to stop scaring ourselves and to stop fighting with ourselves. I mean, one of the things that happens when we do sit or go on a retreat, we realize all the inner conflict we have in experience, and then we're in conflict with the experience we're having because we want it to last, or we want it to go away, or we're bored with it. I mean, it's like, it is a war. It's really this, being in conflict with our experience. So this first step, getting to know the mind, knowing the mind. So let's just reflect on that, because I'm guessing we all have a mind, right? So what does it mean now, in this moment, to know the mind? What is the mind? Where is it? And in Buddhism, we'll say, this is the mind. Because whatever, like you're hearing my voice, or maybe you're seeing your computer screen, or sensing the body sitting, but whatever is being known right now is being known in the mind. So I know it's awkward in English to say it this way, but this moment, any moment, every moment is a mind, is the mind. A moment of mind, maybe we could say. And then, of course, there's the next moment of mind, and then there's the next moment of mind. But we don't normally frame experience in that way, because whatever's happening is always being known in the mind. Every beautiful experience you've had, every horrendous experience you've had, every physical experience you've had, seeing, hearing, feeling, sensation, was known in the mind. Was a moment of the mind knowing an experience. So if we were to deconstruct what we mean by a moment of mind, we would say there's an experience being known. An experience being known. And if there's some hatred, some aversion, or fear, then there's still an object being known, but that object being known is there with this fear, probably not so known. Right? So part of our practice is to bring a lot of integrity in the experience being known so that there's nothing left out. So if there is fear there, or hatred, or some kind of conflict, then that's part of the experience that's being known. But we haven't really developed, and that's really about the training the mind. When we're training the mind, we're developing the integrity of something is being known. And can that something being known, can it be recognized with nothing left out? And what that allows for is then wisdom is able to discern whether that something being known is planting seeds of suffering or not, or seeds of release. Is it wholesome or not? There's no shaping, there's no developing or training the mind without knowing the mind. And knowing the mind is really synonymous with being present, being mindfully aware. Here's how Gil says it, because he brings out this really important point. So I'm just going to read a couple sentences from his article. And the article, by the way, is Mindfulness Meditation as a Buddhist Practice. And Gil wrote that in 2006. I'm sure you can get that online. So he writes, "The knowing aspect of mindfulness is deliberate and conscious. When you know something this way, not only do you know it, but also a presence of mind grows in which you clearly know that you know." I know that again, it sounds a little trippy, and he gives this simile that I think is helpful. Like if you're outside and there's some drama in the street, maybe there's a car accident, nobody's hurt, but there's a lot going on, maybe the two people involved are arguing, and then some spectators stand, and you're one of the spectators, and you're just aware of what's happening, and in the taking it all in, Gil has us imagine there's another person who also is just in a sense standing back and aware of the whole drama, and the two of you catch each other's eyes, and there's that moment of knowing that the two of us are knowing. Does that make sense? Thanks, Nancy. Nancy put the link for, I'm assuming, Gil's article on that I'm referring to. And Nancy will be leading the small groups in a little bit. Yeah, so let's just check that out now. So, of course, I'm assuming, unless you're sound asleep, we're conscious. But can there be a knowing that we're conscious? You see, it's a slightly different experience when we know that the mind is knowing. So when we're conscious, it just means the mind is consciously aware of experience. And when we're mindfully aware, when we know the mind, then we know that the mind is knowing. We know what it's knowing, and we know that it is knowing. So just play with that for a few seconds. I'll stop talking. So we're just knowing that there's knowing. And then the practice is keeping that in mind, that reflective knowing that there's knowing. And that's what we mean by getting to know the mind. Because the mind is primarily characterized by this knowing. So if we want to know the mind, we have to know the knowing. Even though it sounds a little trippy, it can be done. And part of what makes it difficult is it's subtle, and our mind generally is attracted to what's more obvious and gross. Like thinking about what I'm going to eat for lunch today, and then imagining all the options and noticing which options create the most saliva, and then strategizing from there. How am I going to prepare it? When is this going to be over? All these sort of kind of gross uses of the mind. But then the mind remains unaware of the mind. So when we have some continuity with knowing the mind, then one of the things we realize about the mind is it's a river. It's changing. It's not a static thing. Gil refers to it as a process, excuse me, or more accurately, a series of interacting processes. Excuse me. And it's nice to have that information so then when we study the mind, what the mind is knowing, that the mind is knowing, we see it as these interrelated processes, natural processes. And the key is, as a good scientist, we don't project or presume. We don't bring in expectations. We just take it for what it is. It's like what we might say is we really trust our subjective experience. That's the truth we know. And we don't presume there's more than the truth we know. Why would we do that? Well, we do it only because of habit, the way we've been conditioned to think and frame things. So we're undoing that habit, the habit to imagine what the mind is, based on our conditioning, our cultural conditioning, for example, and train ourselves to come into alignment. And we see that the mind, like sensations, like the breath, like sound, like any other aspect of reality, is a river, a changing dynamic, a series of interacting processes. And interestingly, we can shape, we can train the mind, not by getting in there and fixing it, building a better mind, but simply by discerning this changing process of mind. We're discerning it when it's skillful, helpful, in the direction of release, and we're discerning the mind when it's not skillful, when it's in the direction of stress. And we can do that discernment because we know how to know the mind as a changing natural process. So we see when the mind is sort of taking the bait and imagining getting revenge and hoping that somebody gets their just desserts, who we think of as misbehaving and being bad. And we observe that, and we observe the tension, the constriction that goes with that unfolding process of mind. We feel the mind creating hell in real time. And it's very compelling when we see that, like this wisdom, this kind of voice of wisdom and compassion arises, and if it had words, it would say, honey, this isn't helping. This is not helping. And the same thing when the mind is relating skillfully in ways that support the letting go, the releasing, then that's discerned as well, like this is helpful. But we can't shape and train and develop the mind unless we know the mind. And remember the last part of this getting to know the mind, caring for the mind, it's knowing the mind, training the mind, and then releasing, freeing the mind. And this is really, this last piece, the releasing is really the fruit of shaping the mind, training the mind. I remember Ajahn Sumedho, a teacher that, even though I've only practiced with him a little bit directly, but just his teachings over the decades have been so useful, and you can still benefit from them. There so much is online. But he has a very pithy little statement, something like, it's not about following the mind. Because especially when he started to teach back in the 70s, there was a sort of anti-establishment notion that, just let it all hang out. Just, let go, let it be, stop telling ourselves what to do, And there's some truth to that, but actually a lot of what we have to do, we have to appreciate and respect how bound the mind is in habit. And then the retraining, it isn't an aggressive, like I mentioned, it's really just arises from discerning what's skillful and unskillful. That is the change agent in the mind. Not actually getting in there and making the mind good and destroying what's bad, but this ongoing, gradual, steadfast discernment of when the mind is skillful, discerning that it's skillful. When the mind is unskillful, planting seeds of stress, then wisdom discerns that. And it's that discernment, that seeing things as they are, that really transforms the mind. And those are those moments of freedom, of liberation, where the mind is experienced as being free of constriction, free of boundaries, what we normally would call a mystical experience. Now, often when we have a deeper insight of the mind that is free of grasping, that's a nice pragmatic way to describe the basic insight in Buddhist practice, realizing the mind that is free of grasping, realizing the mind that is free of conflict, realizing the mind that is free of selfing, self-centeredness. Do we know that mind? Maybe a little intuition, maybe some of you some deeper intuition, deeper insights, maybe some of you not so much as of yet. But these are insights that are available to all of us. If we get to know the mind, and then if we train the mind to recognize what's skillful and unskillful, not what somebody tells us is skillful and unskillful, but what we see directly in our own heart, mind, the stream of our mind, the unfolding of our mind and heart, what we discern directly is in the direction of constriction and stress and unhealthiness. We discern that. And then when we discern directly, immediately in our own experience, what's in the direction of release and peace and ease and connection and love, then the heart comes into a greater and greater balance. The more pure, for lack of a better word, the more pure the mind becomes, the more simple. Pure meaning empty of greed, hatred, and delusion, or empty of the hindering, limiting qualities of the mind, like self-centeredness, conceit. When the mind gets really pure and simple, then the deeper ways, the more subtle ways that the mind is holding on in unskillful ways, they become apparent. The more subtle ways the mind grasps, the more subtle ways the mind frames things in self-centered ways, the more subtle ways the mind is afraid. They come into view precisely because the mind is becoming more pure, more simple, more clear, more free. So it's like the process of training the mind as we use the purity of the mind to reveal the latent tendencies of impurity. It's a gradual process. First we get to know the mind. That allows us to purify the mind, train the mind to become more simple, more pure. It isn't so much the mind is becoming good as much as the impurities are falling away. Remember, the image the Buddha uses here is like a boat that's been in the water in the ocean for a long time and then is pulled up into dry dock, And over time, all the riggings, the sails, all the stuff begins to rot away. And isn't that an interesting image that the Buddha used? Because it isn't so much Mark as getting himself to some holy place, as much as Mark as the mind has gotten to know the mind, has become steady in the awareness of this is being known, these interacting processes, natural processes of the mind. There's a knowing, and that a knowing allows for all of the impurities, all of the greediness, all of the fear and hate, all of the distractedness, the lack of clarity, doubt, spinning of doubt, allows all that to slowly, gradually be abandoned, fade away, rot away. And what remains is the mind that is unencumbered by selfishness, by hatred, by delusion, by greed, by restlessness, by dullness. And the more pure the mind gets, like I mentioned, the more clearly it sees any remaining habits of distortion. The Buddha talks about 4 kinds of distortions. Imagining things are permanent when they're changing. Imagining things are self when they're nature. Imagining things are beautiful when they're neither beautiful nor ugly. They're just what they are. And imagining things are satisfactory when there is no experience that's actually satisfactory. Doesn't mean experience is bad when we say it's not satisfactory. It just means it's not worthy of grasping. We can't really hold to it. Whatever nice experience you've had in your life, were you able to hold on to it? No. Even the memory, even like noticing our mind going back to that memory gets old, doesn't it? Because we know we're trying to feed on something that was long ago. You know, whatever that imagining is that you keep bringing up or we keep bringing up, it's almost as if we expect that if I really bring up that really nice experience, I'll be able to in some way feed on it. The ego wants to feed on it. But it gets more and more stressful the more we try to live out of the past. So then what do? We imagine some nice future for ourselves and we try to feed on that. Well, that's also stressful because however we might imagine it in intimate detail, it's not real. We can't feed on what we imagine. We can only connect to what's here and now. This is being known. And realize what's helpful and not helpful. Like grasping this moment isn't helpful. Letting go is helpful. And this really is what retreat practice is all about. Getting to know the mind, training the mind through the discernment of what's skillful and unskillful, and then liberating the mind. Realizing these moments where selfing, where grasping, where craving ceases, and there's a little glimpse, a little taste of the mind free of grasping. And then that builds what we call faith, confidence. Oh, this practice works. It really delivers. So we're more willing to go on retreat or do our next day sit, maybe sit a little longer, maybe someday sit twice a day, and we're more willing to practice all day long. So we're not dependent on our 30 minutes of formal meditation time, but we're really knowing the mind, training the mind, freeing the mind all day long. And this is when our practice really begins to take off. I mean, it just makes so much sense. If we're only doing practice 30 minutes a day, and then we're acting in a diluted way 16 hours a day, well, what's going to have the greatest conditioning effect on the heart and the mind, right? At some point, we have to realize that the daily sits and the time we can get on retreat it's all about creating the ground to practice more and more in daily life. As one of my friends and teachers, Steve Armstrong, some of you know Steve, wonderful teacher, says, he used to make this argument, I'm not sure he was the first, but it's all about this lifestyle of mindfulness, this lifestyle of awareness. Otherwise, it's not really going to happen. And that's why community is important. We want to build around us the supports, so this becomes the biggest or deepest value that we have. Knowing the mind, training the mind, freeing the mind. And it doesn't get in the way of earning our living or having good friendships or contributing to justice around us in our world or creating some effective response to climate change or whatever moves our heart. Getting to know the mind, learning how to train the mind, realizing how to free the mind, it will allow us to do everything else that needs to be done. It's really an act of love, I think, more than anything. Sayadaw U Tejaniya says, first we must ask ourselves, what is our relationship to reality? What is our understanding of life? From this we will find meditation is really the only sensible approach to our reality and the problems that can arise from living. We can use it as an escape or an avoidance of life, or we can use it as a practice to attend to life. And that's really the idea here. So for those of you who can stay for the small groups or any time in the next week, what I would recommend is that you just talk with your friends or stay for the small group that Nancy will help organize and really discuss your relationship to your daily sitting, or maybe you just sit a few times a week, or your retreat practice. And you'll have a mixed group, so some of you might have done lots of retreat practice or have a really robust daily sitting practice. Others may be newer to the practice and you just sit periodically or only when you come to groups like this. Otherwise you don't really have a formal practice. But just to share together how you've been valuing that time, the supportive conditions to be able to know the mind, train the mind, release the mind. What have been the supporting conditions for that kind of learning? What gets in the way? How has it crept up, become higher and higher on your priority list, this value of taking care of the mind as the preeminent value? Even I know it might be shocking to say this, but even those of you who might be caring for an infant, where it seems like by far the most important thing, even just open your mind to that. It still may be more important to know, to train, and to release your mind, even more important than the child. It may be essential in order to take care of the child in any sort of loving and wise way. So let me just end with this poem from Maya Angelou. Somebody in our community sent this to me recently. I love this quote. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in the shells of loneliness, until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train comes ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity. In the flush of love's light, we dare be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free. So thanks everyone. And for our Sunday morning community, I won't be here until that last Sunday in November. I think it's maybe the 27th, so hope to see some of you then. In the meantime, Shelley Graff, our new co-guiding teacher at Common Ground, will be leading the Sunday morning program as well as their Wednesday evening program. And then just a couple of announcements. Shelley will be leading the half-day retreat on the 13th. And Shelley Graff and a wonderful teacher, Yang Oh, somebody who graduated with Shelley from the recent teacher training program at IMS, will be leading the year-end retreat. That will go out to the community via our email list very soon. So look for that if you've got time. It starts the 26th of December, and it will end at 12 noon on the 31st of December.